Tract 1305 is a standard 40-acre plot of land with a legal complication. It has over 500 owners. For those holding the smallest ownership stake in this property, their share represents 1/9 millionth of the total acreage. Managing a property with 500 owners creates a significant administrative burden. The Department of the Interior estimates that processing leases and distributing fractions of pennies to the heirs of Tract 1305 costs the federal government over $42,000 a year. The land itself produces roughly $2,000 in annual income. This administrative gridlock is called fractionation. It occurs when property ownership is divided into increasingly microscopic percentages over several generations, eventually making the land impossible to use or develop. This mathematical outcome began with a specific piece of legislation passed over 130 years ago. The current state of Tract 1305 is the result of a deliberate federal strategy. To see how these 40 acres were split 500 ways, we have to look at how the government used land subdivision to restructure the social and political power of Native American tribes. In 1887, Native American tribes held 138 million acres of land across the United States. This territory was secured through treaties and maintained as a collective resource. Under communal landholding, the tribe functioned as a sovereign social unit. There were no individual real estate titles. The land belonged to the community as a whole, which ensured that every member had a home and a place within the tribal structure. As settlers pushed westward, the U.S. government faced increasing pressure to open these territories. Federal officials and land speculators viewed communal landholding as a barrier to the economic models used by the rest of the country. Senator Henry L. Dawes of Massachusetts introduced a plan to change this. The Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the president to subdivide communal tribal lands into individual allotments, forcing Native Americans to adopt a capitalist and proprietary relationship with property. The government determined that breaking the land into private parcels was the most effective way to dissolve the cohesive social structure of the tribes. The Dawes Act operated on a specific, rigid mathematical formula. It divided reservations into private plots, 160 acres for heads of families, 80 acres for single adults, and 40 acres for children. The timeline for this transition was tight. Eligible Native Americans had exactly 4 years to select their plots. If no selection was made, the Secretary of the Interior chose for them. Once individual allotments were assigned, the government invoked a surplus clause. Any remaining unassigned land was legally declared surplus. These surplus lands were rapidly sold off. The government opened millions of acres to white settlers, railroads, and corporations, often below market value. The allotment formula provided a legal framework for the mass transfer of native territory. It transformed tribal land into a commodity that could be extracted from the community. The act tied land ownership to cultural assimilation. The government granted U.S. citizenship to those who adopted civilized habits and lived apart from their tribes. This forced a shift in indigenous domestic life. Families were pushed to abandon traditional gender roles for isolated households based on subsistence farming. In 1906, the Burke Act introduced a new variable, competency. This allowed the Secretary of the Interior to arbitrarily declare a Native person competent to manage their own affairs. A declaration of competency immediately removed the land from federal trust protection. This meant the owner was suddenly responsible for paying standard property taxes in cash. Because most allottees lived in agrarian, cash-poor societies, paying these taxes was a functional impossibility. Approximately 95% of the land granted through these fee-simple patents was eventually lost to foreclosure or forced sales. Citizenship and competency laws created a mechanism for land to move out of Native hands. These policies ensured that the private property forced upon these families would eventually return to the open market. The total impact of this policy was catastrophic. By 1934, Native Americans had lost 90 million acres of land. This represents exactly 2/3 of their 1887 land base. The human result of this math was just as stark. Approximately 90,000 Native Americans, roughly 2/3 of the population, became landless within their own country. For the land that remained, a new problem emerged through inheritance. When an original allottee died, the 160-acre plot was not physically divided among heirs. Instead, the property became equal, undivided interests. Each heir received a percentage of the plot. As those heirs passed land to their children, ownership shares shrank exponentially with every generation. This generational math means the Dawes Act remains an active influence. For many communities, the law continues to lock land in a state of economic gridlock today.